culturally, we may be in the post-Me Too era, but our laws haven't caught up yet. According to a USA Today analysis, at least 27 states have laws that handle rape cases differently if the victim had knowingly consumed drugs or alcohol. These laws, known as voluntary intoxication loopholes, essentially victim blame sexual assault survivors and make it harder to prosecute rapes. New York is working to close the loophole. The New York State Senate passed the bill last year nearly unanimously, but since then, it's stalled in the State Assembly. And my next guest is running for a seat on the New York State Assembly, Jessica Altagracia Woolford. She's also a sexual assault survivor pushing to close the voluntary intoxication loophole in New York. I am so grateful that you're taking the time today to talk about this really important issue. Why do you think voluntary intoxication loopholes are so harmful to victims and survivors of sexual assault?
Well, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to share this, to share my story. You know, I'm running against an incumbent who's been in office for almost 30 years, and he has been holding up this important legislation that would help survivors make the incredibly hard choice to come forward. As a survivor myself, I remember how hard it was to share my story, to seek justice, and unfortunately, the laws in New York State, as they stand, continue to stigmatize, shame, and silence survivors from pursuing this. And that's why I'm running, because I believe that survivors must be at the forefront of changing the laws here. And it's essential that folks really understand what's at stake here, especially in this moment where our bodily autonomy is under assault at the state level across the United States right now.
How do these loopholes come up in everyday cases? I remember back about a decade ago where there were two NYPD police officers who were acquitted because of the victim's testimony not being trusted because she was intoxicated. So explain how this comes up in everyday cases and why it is an obstacle for survivors seeking justice.
Well, you know, people are always looking for a perfect victim, right? And that doesn't exist. Things happen. Most sexual assaults occur, and they're perpetrated by people that survivors know themselves. So I believe that it's essential that the laws affirm what we know must be the standard, which is affirmative consent. And unless the laws do not reflect that standard, then people who feel scared of the consequences of coming forward, which can be really severe, the victim blaming, the shaming, also this general attack on the character of survivors when they come forward, it has an unimaginable mental health cost. So I believe that it's really essential that we stop perpetuating this lie. I actually think it's a lie, not a loophole, that's being upheld in New York State's law right now. I'm running against an incumbent, you know, who takes corporate cash, he takes real estate developer money, and he doesn't feel accountable to us. And my charge simply is we have to elect Democrats up and down the ballot who do the right thing because they care, not because they're scared of losing their jobs.
In terms of what affirmative consent is, how do you define it? Why did you want to focus on this specific issue in your race?
Well, it's definitely one of many issues that I hear from voters all across the district, and not just women. You know, we know that changing this law would have such a massive impact on New Yorkers statewide, but also I believe if we continue to put the pressure, which we started to do, and unfortunately it shouldn't take this kind of pressure, right, in order to affirm what we know is true. And when we talk about affirmative consent, that means whatever your choices are about how you want to enjoy your sex life, you must have consent from folks. It doesn't matter if you're drunk or if you're high or whatever it is that happened to get folks to this place. We shouldn't make the laws conditional on the choices that people made when they experienced such terrible sexual violence.
So one of the things that makes me think of is, you know, that instead of thinking about alcohol as, you know, a lot of women will tell their friends like, well, you know, you shouldn't have been so drunk and then you wouldn't have been raped. And I like to think about alcohol as actually the facilitator that perpetrators use to get away with it. So let's talk about the lies that they tell, because in a lot of ways, if you were to get a person extremely drunk, you know that you can say, well, they were drunk. They didn't know what they were doing. And they know that this culture exists where this argument is persuasive to some. So talk about the lies that rapists and rape apologists tell to avoid real accountability.
Well, this is where we see slut shaming happen. This is where we see victim blaming happen. It's always her fault, their fault that something happened because somehow they made a bad choice. And I've heard this, I've experienced this myself. I think it's essential that we believe survivors, but that we also create a culture that really challenges this idea that people can go without accountability for raping other people. It's really essential, I think, for also folks to understand that the process of coming forward is incredibly challenging at every level. Some folks don't even realize what may have happened, especially if they were drunk the night or the day that it happened to them. And so I believe in this moment, the reason why I'm pushing so hard on this is because it's not only on voluntary intoxication that we have an issue with folks like the incumbent that I'm challenging, but it's the same argument that you have to just go along with the status quo, right? So it's the same logic we hear. We don't have the votes to get there, to close this loophole. And that's the same argument that we hear on housing justice, on climate justice, and a range of other issues right now. And so, a survivor is a person, and a person who has to deal with all of the crises happening in their day-to-day lives. We're not just survivors, right? We're more than that. We're entire people. And I believe that changing this law will really help folks to see themselves and me as a survivor running and sharing my story, but also saying that we don't have to believe these lies about being powerless. And that's the most dangerous lie that rapists and their apologists tell us, that we don't have the power to change the culture and that we don't have the power to change the laws. And what we're proving right now is that that is a lie, because days after we put the pressure on Assemblymember Jeff Dinowitz, he's the chair of Codes Committee, now we've learned that the bill has finally passed out of his committee. But it's essential to make sure that the text there is really faithful to upholding that gold standard of affirmative consent.
Jessica Altagracia Woolford, thank you so much for being here today for this really important conversation. Please stay safe. Hi, I'm Zerlina Maxwell. Thanks for checking out our channel on YouTube. You can see more from Zerlina by clicking any of the videos on this screen, and make sure you subscribe below to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. Thanks for watching.